My name is Elara Quinn, and before that summer, I didn't believe in surrender. I believed in control, in plans, in discipline, in walls so high that even grief couldn't climb them. But the thing about control is that it cracks quietly. Not in a single thunderclap, but in whispers, and by the time you hear it breaking, it's already too late. The year I met him, my world had already fractured 4 times. It started with a letter, crumpled, rain-stained, dropped into my hands at a gas station outside of Barrow Ridge, Nevada. The handwriting was my brother's. The postmark, 3 weeks old. The contents, a set of coordinates and a single line. If you still can't sleep, come find P80. P80. That was the name of the place, or at least what my brother Cole called it when we were kids. P80 stood for Pasture 80, an abandoned piece of Bureau of Land Management territory on the far side of the desert, where wild horses still ran, untouched by fences or men. Cole had gone out there 2 years earlier after the accident. He said he needed silence big enough to bury the noise. I hadn't seen him since. So when the letter came, I drove. I didn't even pack properly. Just the clothes on my back, my camera, and my grief. The desert doesn't greet you gently. It watches you approach. It strips you grain by grain, until all that's left is what you can carry in your chest. By the second day, I found the ridge, and beneath it, the valley, wind and sand and bones of old fences, and there, in the golden distance, a flicker of movement. A horse, not like any I'd seen before, dark bronze, mane torn wild, body scarred like it had wrestled with storms and won. He stood halfway between shadow and sunlight, head high, watching me like he already knew who I was. I froze. Something in my ribs moved, not my heart, but the space around it. Cole's trailer sat crooked near a dry well. Inside, dust, notebooks, an empty coffee tin filled with bullets. But on the table there was another note written in his slanted hand. Don't try to catch him. Sit down first. Below it, he'll take over when you're ready. He did it 4 times for me. I remember whispering to the empty room, what does that even mean? That evening, the wind turned electric, the kind that carries secrets. I walked out toward the valley, the air heavy with the smell of sage and ozone, and there he was again, the horse, standing at the edge of a dry stream bed, framed by the dying sun. I stopped 50 yards away. He didn't move. Something pulled me forward. Not curiosity, not bravery, something quieter. When I reached the halfway mark, my knees gave out. I dropped into the dust without thinking. My body, exhausted, trembling, just sat down. The world went still. For a moment I thought he'd bolt. But instead the horse lifted his head higher. His nostrils flared, eyes glinting like copper fire. He took 1 slow step forward, then another. And in that impossible quiet, I realized I wasn't breathing. They say animals feel your heartbeat before you speak. I think he felt everything I'd tried to bury. The grief, the guilt, the echo of my brother's absence. When he stopped a few feet away, I could see the scars running down his flank. 4 long lines, like the marks of a struggle survived. 4 times, I whispered, barely audible. You did it 4 times for him, didn't you? The horse didn't move, but something shifted between us, like a tide turning. Then the storm hit. It came without warning. A wall of desert wind that howled across the valley. Dust stung my face. The air split open with thunder. I should have run for cover, but I couldn't move. The horse reared, muscles carving lightning into the air. The storm swallowed the world, and all I saw were flashes, hooves, fire, sky, motion. And then, suddenly, silence. He was standing over me, head bowed, steam rising from his coat. I swear I heard a sound, low, broken, like grief itself breathing. That was the first time I cried in years. When the storm passed, I was shaking. My hands were covered in dirt and tears. I reached out without thinking, fingertips brushing air so close to him I could feel the heat. He didn't flinch. He just looked at me, and in that gaze was something ancient. Forgiveness, maybe. Or understanding. That's when I realized what Cole's note meant. To sit down wasn't about submission. It was about letting go, about surrendering the illusion that you could control what broke you. And when you finally did, the world, or something in it, took over. I spent the night in the trailer, replaying the moment in my mind. Every flash, every sound. In the dim light, I found another of Cole's notebooks. Inside, sketches of the horse, each dated weeks apart. Under one drawing, 4 tally marks. Next to them, he came closer each time. Page after page, Cole's handwriting grew shakier, more frantic, more human. The last entry, 4th time, he stood over me. It's like he knows what I did. I think he's forgiven me. No signature, just a fingerprint in dust. I didn't sleep. At dawn, I went back out. The valley was still, glowing pale and endless. The horse was gone, but the air felt different, like it had been rewritten overnight. I found myself whispering to the wind, "Petey." I sat down. He took over. It felt like a code, or a confession. That was the day I decided to stay. Over the next weeks, I watched him from a distance. Each dawn he'd appear, sometimes alone, sometimes leading a small herd through the ridge. He never came too close again, but he always looked my way. I started talking to him, out loud, about Cole, about the accident, about how I never forgave myself for not being in the car. It was stupid, I told myself, talking to an animal. But every time I did, the noise inside my head quieted a little more. And then, on the 32nd morning, something changed. He came closer again. This time, he didn't stop at 50 yards. Or 30. He walked until I could see my reflection in his eyes, and just like before, I sat down. I said it out loud. I sat down. The air seemed to tremble. The same energy as the first night, but heavier. He snorted once, pawed the earth, then leaned forward until his breath brushed my hair. I didn't move. I couldn't. It wasn't fear. It was something deeper, something holy. That's when I realized this wasn't about taming him. It was about being seen, fully, without walls, without masks. And for a moment, I felt something that hadn't lived inside me since Cole died. Peace. Later, I found a message carved into the inside wall of the trailer door. I hadn't noticed it before because it was faint, almost erased by time. It said, "Piety. You don't find him. You let him find you. Sit down, let go. He'll take over when it's time." And below it, a single line that made my throat close. When he does, tell Elara I'm sorry. That night I stood outside, staring at the ridge until the stars burned cold above me. Somewhere out there, Cole's spirit and that horse were bound by something I couldn't yet name. Redemption, maybe. Or forgiveness that ran on 4 legs. The desert wind whispered through the grass, carrying the faint echo of hooves. And I realized he wasn't just a horse. He was a messenger, a mirror. When I sat down that first time, I hadn't surrendered to an animal. I'd surrendered to truth, to life, to whatever it was that took over when all the walls finally fell. And that was just the beginning. Because the next morning, when I opened the trailer door, he was standing there, waiting. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled and comforted me all at once, it was time for him to do it, again. 4 times, Cole had said. 4 times before the world makes sense again. I didn't yet know what that meant. But I sat down, and the wind rose like a heartbeat. The morning air tasted like iron and sand, sharp enough to cut if I breathed too deeply. The first light of dawn stretched long shadows across the ridge, painting the valley in shades of amber and shadow. And there he was, waiting, not grazing, not wandering, just standing, still as stone, eyes fixed on me. Every muscle coiled, every breath measured. Watching, waiting. I swallowed, heart hammering. I wanted to call out to him, to step forward, to run back to the safety of the trailer. But I did none of those things. I sat down. The act had become instinct now. Not surrendering out of fear, but surrendering because something far larger than me demanded it. The wind shifted, and I felt it again. That presence. That impossible force that moved in place of my own chaos. He stepped closer. The ground trembled faintly under the weight of his hooves, the sound subtle yet penetrating. I felt it in my chest before I saw it, the same pulse that had shaken me the first night. And then he nudged me, not aggressively, not casually, but deliberately, pressing his nose against my shoulder. It was as if he were saying, "I am here. You are not alone." The valley was quiet except for the whisper of the wind through the dry sage. The sun rose higher, burning away the shadows, yet still he didn't move. He simply stood over me, an unspoken guardian. I noticed the scars along his flank, 4 of them again, deep and jagged. Each one told a story I could only imagine. Each one mirrored a loss I carried inside. I remembered Cole's notes. 4 times he said, 4 times he did it. And suddenly it made sense, in a way words could never capture. This horse had seen it all. He had carried Cole's grief, his mistakes, his regrets, and now, by some impossible, silent covenant, he was carrying mine too. "Why are you here?" I whispered. My voice sounded hollow in the wide emptiness. "Why do you stay?" The horse shifted, a low snort escaping him. The sound vibrated through the air, almost human in its resonance. And in that sound, I felt a question of my own being posed back at me. "Do you have the courage to truly face yourself?" I shivered. I wasn't sure I did. I wasn't sure I could. The valley had secrets. I could feel them pressing just beneath the surface, buried under dust and memory. I rose, trembling slightly, and followed the faint trail of hoofprints along the dry stream bed. The horse didn't move immediately, just watched, letting me lead. It was a strange inversion of control. Normally, I would have been the hunter, trying to capture, to name, to understand. But here I was the follower, and the realization made my stomach knot with tension and anticipation. The trail led to an old stone outcrop, one I hadn't noticed the first day. It was jagged, blackened by some long-forgotten fire. Beneath it, half buried in the sand, lay a wooden crate, weathered, broken, its hinges rusted. I knelt and pried it open. Inside were artifacts that belonged to Cole: a journal, half-burned photographs, a compass, a small hand-carved figurine of a horse. My fingers shook as I lifted the journal, the familiar slant of his handwriting making my chest ache. "He comes to you in ways you can't imagine. Sit down, he will take over. 4 times, and you will understand." "Cole," I whispered his name, feeling the hollow ache of his absence. And then I realized the horse had led me here. He had wanted me to find this, to understand, to step closer to the truth that had eluded me for months. The wind picked up again, swirling sand across the outcrop. I pulled my jacket tighter, flipping through the journal with trembling hands. The pages were chaotic, filled with sketches of the horse in motion, notes about its habits, behavior, even the way it moved at night. Cole had observed him for weeks, waiting, watching, learning, and then I saw it. A pattern, a series of 4 sketches, each marked with the same tally marks I had seen in the trailer. 4 positions, 4 moments. Each sketch depicted the horse taking over, standing over him, guiding him, comforting him. The thought struck me like lightning. He had done it 4 times for Cole. 4 times when the weight of the world was too much to bear, when Cole had been too broken to continue. And now, was it my turn? I heard the soft crunch of hooves behind me before I turned around. He was closer than before, eyes steady, mane lifting slightly in the gusting wind. He didn't snort or neigh, didn't make a sound. He simply looked at me, and I felt my own heartbeat synchronize with his. I knelt slowly, my palms pressed to the cool stone beneath me. "I don't know if I'm ready," I said. "I don't know if I can—" The horse lowered his head, pressing it gently against my shoulder. A shiver ran down my spine. It wasn't just warmth. It was presence, intention, an ancient, unspoken knowledge. And for a fleeting moment, the tension of the past months, the grief I had carried in silence, seemed to lift, replaced by a strange electric clarity. Hours passed. I had no idea. I didn't care. I just sat, letting the desert wind carve patterns through my hair, letting the horse's steady presence anchor me in ways I couldn't yet explain. The sun arced slowly across the sky, the shadows shifting, yet still he stayed, not moving, not demanding, just being. Then came the whisper. Not a voice. Not a sound, but a feeling, a memory, a pulse that traveled through my chest and filled my head. I saw Cole's face, tired, haunted. I saw him sitting in the same place I was sitting now. I saw his despair, his fear, his longing for a release he could not give himself. And I understood. This was what taking over meant. Not control, not domination, not fear, but the silent act of bearing the weight of another's burden, of holding the space when they could not hold it themselves. The horse had done it for Cole. Now he was ready to do it for me. Even as understanding dawned, fear clenched my gut. Could I survive it? Could I let go enough to let him guide me? My hands shook, my throat burned, but I didn't move. He nudged me again, softer this time, almost imperceptibly. And I realized I was ready. The desert seemed to pulse around us. The air shimmered, the heat rising in waves from the sand. And then, the inexplicable happened. I felt my consciousness expand, as if something vast, older than the world itself, was brushing against mine. The horse stepped closer. I leaned into him instinctively, and the world shifted. Time fractured. Moments became fluid, slipping into one another. Memories of Cole, of my childhood, of the accidents and heartbreaks that had carved me into this fragile shape, swirled together. And through it all, the horse was there, a steadying force, a presence guiding me through the chaos of my own mind. I realized that surrendering wasn't weakness. It was courage, courage to face the pain I had buried, the grief I had denied, the fears I had hidden from the world. And in that surrender, I began to understand something fundamental. The horse was not just a companion. He was a mirror, a teacher, a conduit for healing. By the time the sun dipped behind the ridge, painting the valley in deep oranges and purples, I was exhausted. But for the first time in months, I felt lighter. The weight in my chest had lifted slightly. I had sat down, and he had taken over. I traced the scars on his flank with trembling fingers, remembering the 4 tallies, the 4 times he had carried Cole's burden. And I realized I wasn't alone anymore. I wasn't trapped in my grief. Not entirely. The horse snorted softly, turning away. He didn't walk away, but he stepped back, giving me space. And in that space, I felt a new kind of tension, anticipation. I knew this was only the beginning. The valley, the horse, Cole's mysteries, they were not yet finished with me. 4 times. That phrase lingered in my mind like a chant. The first time had been conquered. But 3 remained, and with each one, I knew the lessons would grow deeper, darker, more transformative. I rose to my feet, knees shaking, and looked out over the valley. The wind stirred the sand, lifting it in spiraling dances that seemed almost alive. Somewhere in that dance, I could feel the pulse of the horse, the echo of Cole, the unspoken promise that the story was far from over. That night, in the trailer, I wrote in my own journal, hands still trembling from the encounter. He took over today. I don't fully understand it, but I trust him. I think this is how I find my way back. Through him, through the valley, through what I thought I had lost. And as I drifted into a restless sleep, I knew without doubt that the next encounter would come. That the valley had more to show me, more to challenge me, more to demand. And I was ready. The desert doesn't forgive mistakes. I learned that the morning the wind changed direction. It swept across the valley in jagged bursts, rattling the trailer and whipping the sand into stinging clouds. I had been trying to track the horse from a distance, notebook in hand, flipping through Cole's sketches like a map to some hidden truth. But the valley had grown stranger in the past days, more unpredictable. He appeared suddenly, as if the desert had exhaled him from the dust. Bronze muscles gleaming in the rising sun, mane tangled with wind, eyes sharp and unblinking. I froze. My chest tightened. There was an energy to him today, heavier than before, as if the storm in the sky had seeped into his veins. I sat down. The first time I had sat down, it had been surrender. The second, it had been understanding. But this third time, I knew instinctively it would be different. The horse stepped closer, nostrils flaring. The air thrummed with tension, and I could feel every heartbeat in the valley, mine and his, synchronized in a rhythm older than memory. He lowered his head toward me, and I felt a pulse run through my body, a vibration that seemed to connect the scarred earth beneath us, the wind above us, the bones of the ridge, the invisible lines of the valley itself. And then I heard it, a sound foreign to the desert, human footsteps. I tensed, ears straining. The horse's ears flicked, nostrils flaring. I hadn't expected anyone here. This was supposed to be our sanctuary. The footsteps grew louder, accompanied by the crunch of gravel and distant metallic clinks, something being dragged. I peered into the dust cloud, heart racing. A man appeared on the ridge, silhouetted against the rising sun. His movements were deliberate, predatory. There was no casual hiker, no wandering traveler. The horse stiffened, muscles taut. He didn't run. He never ran. But the tension radiating from him was enough to make my knees tremble. I whispered, almost inaudibly, "Stay. Please, just stay." He tilted his head toward me, almost as if he understood the threat. Slowly, he shifted, moving between me and the ridge. The sand beneath his hooves kicked up in a fine storm. He was a wall of bronze and power. The man froze. Then, without warning, he shouted, loud and grating, "Hey, you there! Come out!" The horse snorted, a sharp exhalation that seemed to push the very air forward. I felt a wave of courage ripple through me. Not my courage, his. He stepped closer, pressed himself against my side. The pulse I had felt the previous days, the taking over, began again. A slow, insistent vibration that traveled through me, shaking loose the fear, the hesitation, the walls I had built. I realized this was the third time. The man hesitated, watching the horse. Something in the way he carried himself shifted, unease creeping into his stance. I whispered again, "It's okay. You're with me." The horse lowered his head, pressing it against my shoulder. And then, just as before, the world fractured, not in chaos, but in clarity. Memories I hadn't touched for years rose to the surface. My brother's laughter, the screech of tires the night of the accident, the hollow ache of hospital corridors, the whispered apologies I never said, all of it. And through it, the horse was there, steady, grounding me, carrying the weight I could not bear alone. The man shifted again, uncertain, and took another step forward. The horse reacted instantly, stepping into the man's path. A warning, silent but fierce. The ground seemed to hum with tension. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to flee, but I couldn't. I had surrendered. I had sat down, and the energy of the horse was guiding me now. I felt the vibration move through my limbs, a strange electric force that made my thoughts clear yet my muscles tense. My fear wasn't gone, but it was manageable. I could breathe through it, and then the man did something unexpected. He raised a hand. Not aggressively, but inquisitively, and in that split second, the horse's body tensed further. I realized he could sense intent. Not words, not gestures, but the truth behind them. The next minutes were a blur of tension. The man edged closer, curiosity mixed with apprehension, and I, following instinct more than reason, whispered to the horse, "Do it again." The phrase felt ridiculous, almost absurd, but I had learned to trust it, and he responded. He stepped closer to me, brushing me with his head, pressing warmth and power into my body. The pulse returned, a low, steady rhythm that radiated through the valley. My thoughts slowed. The fear became manageable. The tension in my chest eased. The man froze, uncertainty etched into his every movement. For the first time, I saw the valley differently, not just as a place but as a presence. The desert, the wind, the rocks, the horse, all aligned in a rhythm I could feel in my bones. And I realized something terrifying. The valley itself was alive with perception. The horse wasn't acting alone. I wasn't alone, and yet, the danger remained real. The man finally spoke, voice cracking slightly. This isn't just a horse, is it?" I shook my head, too stunned to answer. The horse snorted, lifted one front hoof and stomped sharply. The ground vibrated under the impact. The man flinched, stepping backward. He looked around, suddenly aware of the scale of the space, the presence of something far beyond his understanding. And then he ran. The moment his weight left the ridge, the pulse within me faded slightly. I exhaled, trembling. The horse nudged me again, softer this time, as if confirming I was safe. I ran my hands along his neck, feeling the tension leave him as well. It was then that I noticed something else. A new mark along his flank, faint but unmistakable. A shallow line I hadn't seen before. The desert, the storm, the confrontation. It had left its trace, 4 times. The first time had been surrender. The second time, understanding. And now, the third, courage. Only one remained. I followed the horse back to the outcrop, heart still pounding. The journal lay open, waiting, as if it had been left for me to complete. I traced Cole's sketches again, now understanding with an almost terrifying clarity that each mark wasn't just observation. Each was a lesson. Each was preparation. Each was a step towards something I couldn't yet name. The sun was falling fast, the valley painted in bruised purples and deep golds. The wind softened, but the tension lingered. The pulse in my chest reminded me. The valley was not forgiving. The horse was not merely an animal, and the story was far from over. I scribbled a line in my journal. The third time is courage. I think I understand, but the last one, I fear it. That night, as the stars emerged over the ridge, I stayed outside, notebook abandoned, watching the horse move across the valley. He wasn't grazing, didn't rest. He seemed alert, aware of every shift in the wind, every subtle sound. And in the silence, I felt it again. The presence that had guided me before. Not entirely him, not entirely me. Something larger, older, that threaded through the valley itself. I realized then that the danger of the outside world, the man, the strangers, was minor compared to what this force would demand of me next. The 4th time. And in the quiet, I whispered to the wind, to the horse, to whatever watched over the valley. I am ready, but I don't know if I can survive it. The horse snorted softly in response, eyes reflecting the fading sun. And in that reflection, I saw something I hadn't seen before. Not just survival, but transformation. The desert had tested me. The horse had guided me. And now, the valley awaited the final act. The air was electric before dawn, the kind of tension that presses down on your chest, steals your breath, and whispers that everything is about to change. I knew today would be the 4th time, the last step in whatever Cole's journal and the horse had been preparing me for. I had tried to sleep, but sleep had evaded me. My hands were still trembling from yesterday's encounter, from the sharp reminder that the valley was alive, aware, and unforgiving. Every sound in the trailer made me flinch. Even the soft wind against the metal siding carried the weight of the past weeks. Outside, the horizon was a thin strip of gold. The rest of the desert remained in shadow, and there he was, the horse, waiting. I didn't approach him. I didn't even move at first. I simply sat on the edge of the trailer steps, feeling the desert pulse through me. The wind picked up, sweeping sand around my feet. My chest tightened as I realized this was it. This was the final act. I whispered almost inaudibly, I'm ready. He stepped forward, slow and deliberate. Each step made the ground beneath me tremble, as if the earth itself acknowledged the moment. I could feel his gaze piercing mine, not with judgment, but with understanding. The scars along his flank caught the first rays of sunlight. 4 long lines that told me everything, 4 times. And now, the last one remained. I stood, heart hammering, legs shaking. The valley seemed to shift, shadows stretching unnaturally, the wind carrying a strange resonance, like the whisper of countless lives before me. And then I saw movement. Not the horse, but another figure. A man. He wasn't like the one before. This one moved with purpose, confidence. Something about him screamed danger, and instinctively I knew this was no accident. He had followed me here, or perhaps he had been waiting for me all along. The horse sensed it immediately. He reared, mane lifting like a flame, nostrils flaring. The man froze, uncertainty crossing his face. I felt the vibration again, the pulse that had carried me through the previous, takings over. Only this time, it was stronger, more insistent, like a current demanding I surrender fully, without hesitation. I dropped to my knees. The desert seemed to hold its breath. The horse stepped closer, placing himself between me and the stranger. His eyes burned with unspoken warning, and then, almost imperceptibly, the pulse extended beyond me, into the valley itself. The rocks, the sand, even the distant ridge seemed to vibrate with it. I realized then that the fourth time was not about understanding, not about courage, not even about surrender. It was about trusting the unseen, the unexplainable, the infinite force that had been guiding me all along. I closed my eyes. Memories came, unbidden and vivid. Cole laughing, the accident, the hospital, nights spent staring at empty walls. Every regret, every fear, every guilt I had carried pressed against my chest. I felt the familiar surge of despair rise. And then, as always, the horse's presence met it. He didn't chase it away. He absorbed it. He held it. And through him I felt something extraordinary. The pulse, the taking over, the invisible thread connecting him, me, Cole, and the valley. It was overwhelming, terrifying, yet grounding. The man took a step closer, impatience creeping into his posture. "What are you doing?" he demanded. "This is ridiculous. It's just a horse." I opened my eyes slowly, feeling the power of the pulse travel through me. "He's not just a horse," I said, voice steadier than I felt. He's everything I need to face what I've been running from." The man laughed, harsh and short. "You think a stupid animal can fix you? You're insane." I felt the pulse intensify. The horse lowered his head, brushing my shoulder. And then it happened. The valley responded. Sand swirled in columns around us, lifting and twisting as if alive. Shadows stretched and bent. The air was thick with electricity. The man stumbled back, eyes wide, as if reality itself had shifted. He reached for something in his pocket. A gun, I realized with a sickening clarity. I froze. My mind screamed. But the pulse, the force, guided me. The horse snorted, rearing slightly, a wall of bronze power between me and danger. And for the first time I understood fully. The fourth time was not just surrender, not just trust, not just courage. It was survival through surrender. I dropped fully to the ground, pressing my hands into the sand. The pulse consumed me. Time fractured. Memories and present blended. I saw Cole again, standing at the edge of the valley, guiding me, whispering through the void. Trust him. Let go. Trust the force. The horse pressed closer, nudging me with gentle insistence. The air vibrated. The man froze mid-step, his intentions unraveling under the weight of something he could not comprehend. Suddenly, the wind shifted again. The man dropped the gun instinctively, shielding his eyes as the sand rose in a spinning vortex around him. It wasn't violent, not in a conventional sense, but the sheer force of presence made him fall back, stumbling. He scrambled to his feet, panicked, and fled toward the ridge, disappearing into the dust cloud he had created. I didn't watch him go. My attention was fixed entirely on the horse. The pulse ebbed slightly, leaving me trembling, breathless, and aware of the valley in a way I never had before. I opened my eyes fully. He lowered his head, breathing against my shoulder once more, and I felt release 4 times. He had taken over 4 times now. The desert was quiet again. The sun had climbed higher, washing the valley in blinding gold. The horse's mane shimmered in the light. He stepped back, eyes meeting mine with an intensity that made my chest ache. I realized then that this was not just about survival or courage or surrender. It was about transformation. I rose slowly, hands brushing his neck, feeling the warmth and weight of him. "Thank you," I whispered, voice raw. "Not for saving me from the man, but for showing me how to survive myself, how to hold my grief, how to surrender without losing myself." The horse snorted softly, turning to the valley, and I understood. The journey was far from over. But the most dangerous step, the one that had demanded everything, had been taken. I walked to the outcrop, journal in hand, my fingers tracing Cole's sketches once more. The tally marks were complete. 4 times, every moment accounted for, and suddenly, the pieces aligned. First time, surrender. Second, understanding. Third, courage. Fourth, transformation. I could feel Cole's presence then, not as a memory but as a living pulse within me. The horse had carried him before me, and now, he had carried me too. I sat on the edge of the outcrop, watching the valley stretch endlessly below. The wind carried whispers, soft but insistent, almost like voices of the past. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The horse stood nearby, watchful but calm. The desert seemed at peace, yet alive, as if acknowledging the completion of the ritual, the cycle, the fourfold journey. I took a deep breath. For the first time in years, I felt whole, not because the world had healed, not because the past had vanished, but because I had survived it, guided by a presence older, stronger, and wiser than myself. And then, as the sun reached its zenith, a sudden breeze lifted the sand into the air, carrying it like golden dust. The horse reared briefly, mane lifting like flames, and in that instant I understood fully. He was not just a creature of flesh and bone. He was a messenger, a guardian, a mirror. He had taught me that surrender is strength, that trust is power, and that courage is measured not in battles fought, but in willingness to face yourself. I reached out, fingertips brushing his neck, and whispered, "We did it. We survived, together." The wind rose again, lifting us in a moment of suspended reality, and I knew without question that the valley, the horse, and Cole's memory would guide me always, not away from danger, not away from grief, but through it. The valley was quiet that morning, almost unnaturally so. The wind had softened to a gentle whisper, carrying the faint scent of sage and dust. I stood on the ridge, the horse beside me, watching the desert stretch endlessly. The pulse I had felt during the 4th time lingered subtly, like a heartbeat beneath the earth, a reminder that the bond we shared wasn't gone. It had simply changed. I knelt beside him, running my hands along his warm, strong flank. 4 scars marked his body. 4 times he had taken over. 4 times he had carried the weight of grief and fear. And in that same rhythm, I felt my own transformation mirrored. Grief tempered by courage, fear softened by trust, and a silent understanding that life, no matter how broken, could still be held. I whispered Cole's name into the wind. The air didn't answer, but it didn't need to. I felt him in every ripple of sand, every shiver in the horse's mane, every breath that rose and fell with mine. The journal lay open nearby, sketches completed, tally marks etched into memory as if confirming that the cycle had reached its end. And yet the valley was alive with quiet secrets. I could sense them in the shifting light, in the tremble of rocks, in the distant echoes of hooves that weren't entirely his. He nuzzled my shoulder softly, and I realized that our bond didn't end with completion. It was ongoing, a living rhythm, as unpredictable as the desert wind itself. For the first time in years, I felt at peace, whole in a way I hadn't believed possible. I could face the emptiness, the loss, the shadow of my past, not as a prisoner but as someone who had been guided, carried, and ultimately changed. The horse's eyes held mine, steady and knowing. He had been my teacher, my guardian, and my mirror. As the sun rose higher, scattering light across the valley, I took a deep breath. It was time to leave the ridge, to step into the world beyond the desert, carrying everything I had learned. But before I turned, the horse lifted his head and whinnied softly, a sound almost like a warning, almost like a question. I froze. Something stirred in the distance, at the far edge of the valley, just beyond where the horizon dipped into heat haze. It wasn't the man from before. No, this was something else. Something older. Something that had been waiting. The horse's ears flicked, body tense, eyes gleaming with anticipation. I felt the pulse return, faint but insistent, echoing the rhythm of the first night, the second, the third, and the fourth. And in that instant, I realized that the valley, the horse, and whatever force had guided us were far from finished. I smiled. Heart-pounding, because if this journey had taught me anything, it was that surrender was not the end. It was the beginning, and the valley still had secrets to reveal.